Hello, friends. I want to just do a short response, really, to some of the queries I've had recently. You might have seen that in The Friend, the the weekly Quaker magazine, on the 11th of April, just before yearly meeting, I had a two-page article called to Chaplaincy um, published. So many thanks to the editors for taking that. And in it, I really talk about the idea of, chaplaincy is a way of putting into practice our faith tradition, our beliefs, and our personal spiritual call, if you like. So that kind of famous idea of, go where need is and be with them, walk alongside them, and that is a very helpful way of acting out our faith. And I've had a few responses to this article. I mean, the main point that I make is, I'm critical, I suppose, of the way in which Quakers have become very protest driven, very, quick to put out press statements and calls for action and condemning this, warning of this. And I mean the Gaza minute that we wrote at the early meetings, perhaps more of that. I would say while I've got no problem with the minute that we wrote around Gaza, I've got no issue with that, and I didn't minister or even feel any need to say anything. So that's not a problem as such. Wh- But what I've found myself saying in conversation with people since yearly meeting is, I hope friends don't go away from yearly meeting think you've achieved something. Like we haven't done anything. We've written hundreds of words together. They might be great words. I really don't understand how anyone thinks they achieve anything. Um, and I suppose my argument that I'm making around chaplaincy is that it's a really practical way of getting in alongside people and making a difference. One of the things I wanted to just draw attention to was this Guardian long read that Gabby Hinsliff wrote recently, just the other day. I'm sure many of you have read it. I know a lot of Quakers are Guardian readers. It was on the 10th of June. And how does, what's the title of it? Something about going beyond woke. How does woke start winning again? Gabby Hinsliff. And I mean, I thought it was a very powerful article. And what I particularly liked, did you notice that comment in the middle by Marvin Rees, the former mayor of Bristol? And he was talking about, the coming down of the downfall of the Colston statue by the protesters. And he was talking about, symbolic acts, which I know is a little bit different from what we're talking about in terms of press statements. But obviously, one of the critiques I'm making is that we do an awful lot of environmental activism and a lot of public support for these kinds of actions. So these symbolic acts. Now, what Marvin Rees said, while symbolic acts could be catalysts for change, he said, but without concrete action, this is the quotation, they can be more about satisfying the immediate emotional needs of members of privileged groups than about changing the actual political and economic status of people in oppressed groups. And of course, he was saying, has any of that protest changed materially the lives of the people, the Black Britons, I suppose, that the protesters were trying to improve. And really, this is the kind of point that I'm making, is that, I just wish that chaplaincy was getting a bigger profile amongst Quakers in Britain, because we've got such a huge opportunity to have a real impact. I know I keep going on about it. I go into to prison regularly and I see what goes on there. Now, the two specific responses that I've had to this article, one was from some friends who are political activists themselves, and as they say, we are the people who glue ourselves to street furniture, which is the facetious comment I made. It's a flippant comment. I accept that. And they challenged me, to be fair. Um, I don't really know what they were wanting from the conversation with me, because I'm not really wanting to engage in discussions around environmental protests. You do what you feel called to do. I'm not knocking it. But what I do want to say is, let's give as much weight to chaplaincy and encourage people who feel called to it. It is very much a spiritual approach. This is not something where sheer bravery is gonna help. You need to have a spiritual depth to your character, your experience of life to be able to go in. And it's not just prisons, it's the police as well, potentially. I mean, the Salter lecture this year, that talk by Abby Johnson about asking the police to pause sometimes. Well, as I've said to Sheila and Graham Taylor, this is where chaplaincy really could help. I mean, we have a police chaplain, and we only have one, as far as I'm aware, in Quakers across Britain. But why don't we try and get some more? Being in police stations, being alongside them, asking them to pause, think about what's going on. And I've had some questions then about, well, Emma, you're making all these points, you're criticizing us for being activists, you're criticizing us for protesting. What is this Quaker prison chaplaincy then, or what is Quaker chaplaincy in other settings? What do you do? And I think maybe there's some more work that we need to do here in explaining more broadly to all of Quakers across Britain about what is chaplaincy, what can it be, what can we do? And of course, we've got, in terms of numbers, we must have about 80 or so chaplains, maybe more, maybe 100 chaplains. There's 60 or 70 working in prisons. There's loads of volunteers. So, I mean, in the prisons that I've worked in, I know half a dozen, 8, 9, 10 possibly volunteers going into prisons every week. So there's a huge amount of experience. There's hundreds of people with this kind of experience. There's dozens of hospital chaplains. There's, like I say, one police chaplain. We have this knowledge, and we can make a real impact. So perhaps there's a piece of work to be done about explaining more broadly. And maybe I should do an interview like this or something to explain what chaplaincy is. Because when I'm in there talking to people, that is how you change people's lives. It's that starfish story, isn't it? Does a chaplain make any difference? Well, I've spoken to 3 men today. Makes a difference to them. I think it does. I think I've made a difference today with those 3 men. I know I have. And every group that I run, I call mine the quiet group. Other chaplains call their group different things. You know, they're hugely powerful. They're powerful for the men who come from. They're also powerful for the volunteers and for us chaplains and our visitors. We have people come along and want to see what goes on. And maybe it's small work, but we're a small faith group in the UK. And I just hope we could encourage each other and really take this seriously. So, what do we do? What do chaplains do? Chaplains go in, we show up, we stand alongside people. We don't necessarily judge what's happening. Yes, the system might be flawed, things might not be ideal, but there's a huge number of civil servants, public servants, police officers, prison officers doing amazing work, real amazing work, and they show up every day and do that. It's so different from just doing a protest and just doing a banner, I'm afraid. It just is. So maybe maybe we need to do some more information telling, maybe we need to tell you more publicly what chaplaincy is, what it can do, why that might be a real practical solution on a broader scale that Quaker Life Central Committee should really be looking at how can we build this. For example, why don't we have a key target that we will have a Quaker chaplain in every single prison in the UK? We should do. Now, not all prisons want it, but we can do a lot of encouragement and we can get these things moving, in that direction. It might be take a few years to do it. So I hope that started to address some of the issues that I'm having some feedback about. I think I have upset people, and there's no point in me apologizing too much for upsetting people because obviously I have written this article with partly that intention to kind of upset things a little bit. And it's between you and God. If you're called to environmental protest, then I'm not criticizing any individual. But what I am doing is saying that as an institution, I think maybe we can shift how we look at things. We can shift how we you know are impressed by all of the environmental protest and all of the political protest that we do. We could also perhaps equally be as impressed by the the chaplaincy that we do. And I hope that you'll read my article if you haven't already seen it. Um, Go to the friend, buy a subscription, or perhaps your local meeting has a copy, and I can probably send you a copy as well. I've got a few spares that they've given me, so get in touch. So thanks very much, and for listening. It's a huge, well, it's a huge privilege. I mean, 2,500 hours are just we just got to 2,500 hours of watch time on this channel. It's astonishing. So thank you very much for your ongoing support. And please do write to me on quakerology@gmail.com if you'd like to know more about chaplaincy in particular. I'd love to come and talk about it. If you in your local meeting or area meeting would like to support a chaplain, but you're not finding the right people, then ask me to come along. I will gladly come along, and so will many other chaplains. So we are here to raise awareness of that. So yeah, thanks.